In the fog-shrouded dawn of October in Ashford, Vermont, the air hung heavy with the rumble of ancient tractors and the scent of damp earth. This small town had a way of rendering people invisible, and Caleb Ross at 38 was one of its forgotten souls. He was the mechanic the one folks whispered about when engines sputtered out. No flashy sign, no online presence, just word of mouth. Tractor dying, call Caleb. Old Ford won't start, take it to Caleb. That Tuesday morning, Caleb was wedged under the chassis of a battered F-150 Grease, dripping onto his worn shirt when an unnatural silence fell. He slid out, wiping his hands, and spotted it, a sleek black SUV with out-of-state plates gleaming like it had never touched mud. It didn't belong here. A woman emerged, mid-30s auburn hair, neatly tied, clad in a sharp gray blazer and red-heeled pumps that seemed to challenge the gravel lot. Her presence made the garage feel smaller, the air thicker. Caleb stood rag in hand as she approached with measured steps. "Are you Caleb Ross?" she asked, her voice cool, carrying the weight of authority without effort. "Depends who's asking," he replied, eyeing her steadily. "I'm Vivian, Cole, CEO of Coltech Systems." The name hit like a jolt. Coltech Defense Precision Engineering. The company where he'd once been a star engineer fresh from MIT advising on high-stakes projects, until he'd called out a fatal flaw in the R7 engine system, one that could kill in sub-zero conditions. They'd buried his warnings, then buried him, firing him quietly, blacklisting him from the industry. 10 years ago, he'd fled back to Ashford trading boardrooms for grease pits, all to raise his daughter Lily away from that world. What could a powerhouse like her want, with a man the world had erased, and why now? After all this time, Vivian Cole stood in the dim light of Caleb's garage, the sleek SUV behind her casting long shadows across the oil-stained floor. She extended a thick folder toward him, her expression unyielding, yet laced with a hint of urgency. Caleb didn't reach for it immediately. He crossed his arms, the rag still dangling from his fingers, as if weighing whether to send her away or indulge her curiosity. "I've spent 3 months tracking you down," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the hum of a distant tractor. "You're good at disappearing." Caleb glanced at the folder but kept his distance. "I'm a mechanic now. If you're here about some high-tech project, you've got the wrong guy." "No," she replied, stepping closer. "I have the right one. The engineer who warned about the R7 engine's delayed explosion risk in low temperatures. The one they ignored and then silenced." The words hung in the air like exhaust fumes. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his face remained stoic. 10 years ago, he'd been at the top MIT graduate senior technical advisor at Coltech Defense in Boston. He designed systems for military vehicles' precision engineering that saved lives on paper. But when he flagged the flaw in the R7, a vulnerability in the pressure valves that could turn a routine deployment into a deadly inferno, his superiors buried the report. They called it a minor oversight, pushed him out with a quiet severance, and blacklisted him from the industry. Whispers followed. Too idealistic, not a team player. He'd returned to Ashford, the quiet Vermont town where he'd grown up trading suits for grease-stained overalls. No more boardrooms or prototypes, just fixing tractors' pickups and the occasional bakery mixer. It was honest work, the kind that let him sleep at night, and it paid enough to keep the roof over their heads, his and Lily's. Lily Ross, his 9-year-old daughter, was the anchor in his world. She had her mother's bright eyes and a laugh that could cut through the heaviest fog. Normal in every way, quick-witted, obsessed with drawing horses and preferring fried chicken over the pizza the other kids raved about. But normal was a gift Caleb cherished. After losing his wife, Sarah, to a sudden illness 5 years back, He'd vowed to give Lily stability. No more risks, no more fighting systems that chewed people up. As if on cue, the garage door creaked open and Lily bounded in her ponytail, swinging hands, clutching a bottle of water. Her shirt was smudged with paint from whatever art project she'd been buried in. "Dad, I finished drawing the airplane. Can we go eat soon?" Caleb's expression softened instantly. He knelt to her level, ruffling her hair. "Soon, kiddo. Just finishing up here." Vivian's gaze shifted to Lily, and for the first time her polished facade cracked a flicker of something softer, perhaps recognition. "Your daughter?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," Caleb said, standing protectively. "Lily, this is Ms. Cole. She's visiting." Lily waved shyly, then eyed Vivian's heels. "Those shoes are fancy. Do they hurt?" Vivian smiled, faintly caught off guard. "A little, but they get the job done." Caleb watched the exchange, then turned back to Vivian. "Look, whatever you're here for, I'm out of that game. I fix things that people actually need, like tractors that feed families, not machines that could end them." Vivian didn't flinch. She opened the folder herself, revealing schematics he'd recognize anywhere, the R7 blueprints annotated with his old notes. "I inherited Coltech from my father last year, and I've uncovered plans to restart production on the R7 line, almost unchanged, flaws and all. If we don't fix it, people will die. You're the only one who saw it coming before." Caleb's eyes narrowed. The memories flooded back, late nights, poring over data, the heated arguments in sterile conference rooms, the day they handed him his walking papers. He'd lost everything, his career, his confidence, but gained a life where he could be there for Lily's school plays and bedtime stories. He shook his head. "I chose not to live a lie anymore. You carry too much of that world's baggage to understand." Vivian paused, her composure wavering. She glanced at Lily again, who was now sketching on a scrap of paper nearby. "Maybe I do, but this isn't just about the past. It's about preventing the same mistakes." Caleb took the folder, finally flipping through it briefly before handing it back. "I'm sorry. Find someone else." As Vivian turned to leave, her heels clicking against the concrete, she paused at the door. "Think about it. For the people who can't speak up like you once couldn't." The SUV pulled away, leaving Caleb in the quiet garage. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "She seemed sad, Dad." "What did she want?" Caleb forced a smile. "Just an old fix that won't stay broken." But as he watched the dust settle, he knew the ghosts of his past weren't done with him yet. 3 days passed without a word from Caleb. No call, no email response to the one Vivian had left in the folder. He buried himself in the garage, fixing a rusted lawnmower for old Mr. Harlan down the road and helping Lily with her school project, a diorama of a Vermont farm complete with tiny cardboard cows she'd painted herself. The routine was his shield, a deliberate choice to keep the world small and safe. But at night, as Lily slept, the schematics haunted him. The R7's flaws weren't just lines on paper, they were potential graves for soldiers in frozen fields, mechanics in hangars, families waiting at home. On Thursday afternoon, his Chevy Silverado rumbled to a stop outside Coltech's temporary Vermont division, an old factory repurposed into a testing lab, its brick facade still bearing faded paint from its lumber mill days. Vivian emerged from the entrance, her blazer swapped for a more practical lab coat, but her posture unchanged, confident, unyielding. She didn't look surprised to see him, just offered a faint nod and handed over a visitor badge. "I figured you'd show," she said, leading him inside without preamble. "Not a guess," Caleb replied, clipping the badge to his shirt. You knew I'd bite eventually." The lab hummed with activity engineers in white coats hunched over monitors, the air thick with the scent of heated metal and ozone from running prototypes. Vivian guided him to a central workbench where the R7 engine mock-up sat, its components exposed like a dissected beast. Data scrolled across nearby screens, pressure readings, thermal maps, stress simulations. Caleb's eyes scanned it all in seconds, his old instincts kicking in despite himself. He shook his head slowly. "This is worse than I thought. The exhaust valves are still offset. Push it in sub-zero ops and the catalyst buildup will spike pressure twofold. You're playing with fire, literally." One of the engineers, a young man with wire-rimmed glasses, glanced up from his tablet. "Who the hell is this guy?" "Some local handyman." Vivian shot him a look. "This is Caleb Ross, the one who flagged this issue a decade ago." The room fell quieter. Another engineer, older with the salt and pepper beard, snorted. "The whistleblower? Thought you were a myth, or retired to fix tractors." Caleb ignored the jab, leaning over the prototype. He traced a finger along the valve assembly, his mind racing through calculations he'd run years ago. "Tractors teach you more than you think. They don't forgive mistakes, neither should this." The bearded engineer crossed his arms. "We've run sims." "It's stable." "Sims in a controlled lab," Caleb countered. "Not in the field with ice buildup or contaminated fuel. I've seen engines like this fail on farm equipment in winter storms. Scale it up to military specs and you're looking at catastrophes." Tension thickened as more heads turned. Vivian watched silently, letting Caleb navigate the skepticism. He pulled out a notepad from his pocket, simple graph paper, and sketched a quick adjustment, rerouting the valves with the secondary bleed line. "This redistributes the load. Costs pennies, more saves lives." The young engineer scoffed. "That's armchair engineering. We've got PhDs here." Caleb met his gaze evenly. "And I've got real-world scars. Try it your way and tell that to the families." The room bristled, but Vivian stepped in. "Run the sim with his changes, now." As the team inputted the tweaks, Caleb stepped back, wiping his hands on his jeans. The results flickered on screen pressure, stabilized efficiency up by 12%. Murmurs rippled through the lab, not full acceptance, but a crack in the armors. That evening they met at the diner across from the garage, a cozy spot with vinyl booths and the smell of fresh coffee. Lily sat in the corner booth, absorbed in a book about horses, her fries half-eaten. Vivian slid into the seat opposite Caleb, her usual poise softened by the day's events. "You were angry with me earlier," she said, stirring her tea. "Because of my father, he was the one who pushed you out." Caleb stared at his coffee, black and steaming. "Not just him, the whole system. I fought it once, and it cost me everything, my job, my reputation. I came back here to rebuild, not relive it." "Then why show up today?" Vivian pressed her voice quieter. He glanced at Lily, who was underlining a passage in her book with a crayon. "Because silence kills, too. I don't want her growing up in a world where speaking up gets you erased. If I walk away now, I'm teaching her that's okay." Vivian nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the diner's warm lights. "My father, he knew about the flaw, covered it to meet deadlines. I found the memos after he passed. That's why I'm here fixing what he broke." Caleb leaned forward. "Then let's do it right, but on my terms." She agreed, outlining the next step, a presentation to the Defense Technical Board tomorrow. High stakes with engineers and investors who could greenlight the R7 reboot or scrap it. "You ready to stand in front of them?" Caleb hesitated, thinking of Lily waiting at home, of the life he'd built away from spotlights. but the weight of unspoken truths pressed heavier. "I'll stand," he said finally. "Not to prove them wrong, but to make sure they can't ignore what's right anymore." As they parted, the diner's bell jingling behind them, Caleb felt the pull of his past tightening. Tomorrow would test not just the engine, but whether a forgotten man could still make the world listen. The Vermont Defense Technology Center loomed like a fortress of glass and steel under the crisp morning sun, its conference room buzzing with the low hum of projectors and murmured conversations. Caleb Ross entered last his work boots, thudding softly on the polished floor, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and polished loafers of the 9 board members seated around the oval table. He carried only a rolled-up notepad and a small wooden crate, ignoring the skeptical glances that followed him. Vivian Cole sat at one end, her expression composed, but her fingers drummed subtly on the armrest, a rare tell of nerves. The chairman, a grizzled veteran named Harlan Grant, with decades in defense contracting, cleared his throat to start. "Miss Cole, you called this emergency review for the R7 relaunch. Who's this?" "Consultant." Vivian nodded toward Caleb. "This is Caleb Ross, former lead engineer on the original R7 project. He's here to present critical findings." A ripple of murmurs spread. One board member, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s named Dr. Elena Vargas, leaned forward with a smirk. "The whistleblower, I thought you were a legend or a cautionary tale. What qualifies a small-town mechanic to advise on multi-million-dollar systems?" Caleb set his crate on the table without flinching. He unrolled his notepad, revealing hand-drawn schematics smudged with pencil lead. "Experience, he said simply, his voice steady like the hum of a well-tuned engine. "Not just in labs, but in fields where failures mean lives lost. I've fixed enough broken machines to know when one's built to break." He began without preamble, projecting his sketches onto the screen. The R7's exhaust valves are misaligned by just 3 degrees. In sub-zero conditions like a winter deployment in Alaska or Eastern Europe, the catalyst residue builds up here. He pointed to a circled section. Pressure spikes, seals crack, and you get a delayed ignition. Not a bang, but a slow burn that turns a vehicle into a coffin. The room shifted uncomfortably. Harlan frowned, scanning the data. "Our simulations show stability." "Simulations in climate-controlled rooms," Caleb countered. "Try it on a Vermont farm in January." "I've seen similar setups fail on tractors, ice clogs the lines, fuel contaminates, and boom. You're replacing an engine mid-harvest. Scale that to military ops contaminated diesel from a supply chain glitch, and your troops are sitting ducks." He opened the crate, revealing a crude wooden model he'd built overnight. A scaled-down R7 valve system pieced together from scrap metal and pine. "Watch this." He poured a simulated coolant mixture over it, cranking a manual lever to mimic pressure. The original design seized a telltale crack forming. Then he adjusted it to his specs, a rerouted bleed line, and repeated. It held, venting excess smoothly. Dr. Vargas crossed her arms. "Cute toy, but we're talking precision engineering, not backyard hacks." Caleb met her gaze. "Precision that kills isn't precise, it's reckless. Your advanced team, overlook this because it's not flashy. It's basic physics, the kind that keeps things running when the glamour fades." Whispers erupted. A younger board member, tech-savvy and impatient, pulled up their official blueprints. This could delay production by months. Investors won't like it. Harlan held up a hand, his eyes on Caleb's model. "Son, you just demonstrated what our million-dollar prototypes missed. If this holds in full tests, it will." Caleb said. "I've run the math, same as I did 10 years ago when they buried it to meet deadlines." The chairman leaned back, rubbing his chin. "You're the one who got pushed out for this. Why come back now?" Caleb paused, the weight of the question settling. He thought of Lily's drawings, her innocent questions about why he fixed things instead of building them. "Because ignoring the truth doesn't make it go away, it just waits to explode. I'm not here for redemption or a job. I'm here so no one else pays for shortcuts." Silence blanketed the room. Dr. Vargas finally uncrossed her arms, her smirk gone. "Impressive. But can you implement this across the line?" Caleb shook his head. "Not as an employee. I won't join a system that silences voices like mine, but I'll guide your team, teach them to listen to the basics before chasing the stars." Harlan nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Ms. Cole will halt the relaunch pending full audits based on this." Vivian exhaled, her relief palpable, though she masked it with a professional nod. As the board filed out, Harlan approached Caleb, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You just saved a lot of lives, mechanic. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Caleb packed his model, the tension easing from his shoulders like a loosened bolt. For the first time in years, the ghosts of his past felt lighter, not banished, but balanced. He had stood his ground not for glory, but for the quiet certainty that he'd done right by Lily and the unseen many who depended on machines that ran true. 1 month after the boardroom showdown, the crisp Vermont air carried the faint buzz of change. Vivian Cole stood on a modest stage in a renovated community hall in downtown Ashford, the kind of place usually reserved for town meetings or holiday fairs. Flanked by banners for the newly launched Rebuild Initiative, a fund dedicated to overhauling basic engineering for both civilian and defense applications, she addressed a small crowd of locals engineers and a few lingering board members from the Defense Center. The program promised grants for safe, reliable tech redesigns, prioritizing real-world testing over rushed prototypes. "This isn't about cutting-edge innovation alone," Vivian said, her voice steady through the microphone. "It's about investing in people who understand the fundamentals, the ones who ensure systems don't fail when lives depend on them." She didn't name Caleb directly, but as she outlined the fund's first projects, including a full audit of the R7 line based on his recommendations, eyes turned toward him. He stood at the back, arms crossed his flannel shirt, a quiet rebellion against the suits in the room. When Vivian called him forward as the initiative's independent technical advisor, no strings, no office, just his expertise on call. The applause started slow, then swelled. Harlan Grant, the board chairman, shook his hand firmly. "You've got a standing invitation to our labs, Ross. No more burying good ideas." Caleb nodded, accepting a plaque with understated grace. "I'll be there when needed, but my shop's still open for tractors." Back at the garage that evening, the sun dipped low, painting the Vermont hills in hues of amber and gold. Caleb tinkered with an old engine block under the hood of a neighbor's pickup, the familiar rhythm of wrenches and bolts grounding him. Lily sat nearby on a stool, her sketch pad open, pencils scratching out a scene of horses galloping through autumn leaves. The day's events lingered in the air like the scent of fresh oil, but neither spoke of it much. Lily just beamed when she overheard folks at the hall calling her dad a hero. The crunch of gravel announced a visitor. Vivian's SUV pulled up, less imposing now in the fading light. She stepped out carrying a small wooden box, her heels swapped for practical boots that suited the dirt lot better. Caleb straightened, wiping his hands as she approached. "I thought you'd skip the ceremony," she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Wouldn't miss seeing something good come from the mess, he replied, leaning against the truck. She handed him the box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was his old red pen from MIT days, the one he'd used to mark flaws in countless designs. Now it sat in a glass frame, engraved with simple words: "The man who rewrote what others erased." Caleb traced the inscription, a rare flicker of emotion crossing his face. "You didn't have to." "I did," Vivian said softly. "My father built an empire on shortcuts. You reminded me and the board that real strength lies in fixing what's broken, not hiding it. Thank you for not staying silent." He closed the box gently. "And thank you for listening. Not many in your world do." They stood there as dusk settled the garage's fluorescent lights, flickering on. Lily wandered over, peering at the gift. "That's your lucky pen, Dad, the one from your stories," Caleb chuckled, pulling her close. "Yeah, kiddo. Turns out it's still got some use." Vivian watched them, her usual armor softened. "You've built something real here, Caleb. Not just machines, a life that matters." He glanced at the hills where the last light faded. "That's all I ever wanted, for Lily to see that truth wins even if it takes time." As Vivian drove away, waving to Lily, Caleb returned to the engine, the pen now propped on his workbench like a quiet sentinel. The world outside might spin with contracts and deadlines, but here in the heart of Ashford, things ran true bolts, tightened just right. A daughter's laughter echoing, and the knowledge that one man's stand could echo far beyond a forgotten town. In the end, Caleb Ross wasn't defined by the degrees he'd earned or the battles he'd lost. He was the man who kept things running, tractors for farmers' engines, for families, and now a path towards safer systems for strangers he'd never meet. Lily grew up knowing that her drawings evolving to include not just horses, but blueprints of dreams rebuilt. And in the quiet evenings, as stars dotted the Vermont sky, Caleb found peace in the simplicity he'd chosen, the unbreakable bond with his daughter, and the subtle shift in a world that had finally remembered to listen.